offensive line, right? Like offensive line was a big part of this. I actually even want to broaden out to the coaching decisions that they made on the OC and the offensive line side. But how are you feeling so far? Now that you know what you know through 2 weeks, how are you feeling about the decisions and the moves the Seahawks made for the offensive line?
I feel okay. I think Zabel's gotten a bad rap from like Pro Football Focus, and that might be impacting some of the people who really know offensive line have been pretty calm on Zabel. And you look at all the veterans that we're kind of looking at in the offseason, the Kevin Zeitlers and the Will Fries and Tevin Jenkins, and no one's really jumping off the page. I'll say the one guy, and you sent me a text last week, and he's not playing the position that we thought he'd be playing. So maybe we're wrong on that one. But Jared Wilson has gotten off to a really strong start with the Patriots. I think he's playing left guard there, if I'm correct.
He is.
And so we looked at him as a center prospect, a pure center. And Zabel's obviously playing left guard. So I don't know if he would have been able to play center or another position. That's the one I still feel a bit uneasy about. If they could have had two guys like that in the offseason, but it's not like Anthony Bradford or Sundell or any of those guys have been a real problem. I think they've been fine. But seeing him succeed, and I wanted him in the second round, and the fact that he went past the Jalen Milroe pick, that's made me feel a little uneasy. And if Will Fries came out and was playing great, that one would be a little harder to swallow. But he's been kind of mid, and Ryan Kelly's been banged up, which was a concern you brought up. He was a guy that I liked quite a bit. I know some guys on our show liked him. He was out last week. I don't know if I think he's ruled out again this week. And age and injury, that's a concern. So really, when you look at that list of veterans, no one's really jumped off the page. I don't know how Joe Thuney's done with the Chicago. That's an area.
We'll touch on it. We'll touch on it right now, actually. So I'm looking right now, and we always talk like Pro Football Focus grades are certainly not the thing to like decide everything based off of, but there's not a lot of good offensive line measures out there where you can at least say, okay, these guys were measured by the same criteria. How did they do? Like, it's hard to say. So it's at least worth bringing up. And looking at Will Fries, remember the thing with Will Fries that we talked about was besides the injury, this guy had been not that good, except he had a really good start to last year. His like highest PFF grade in his career before last season was 61.2. And then he had this big breakout. He was like 86.9 last year. Everyone's like, oh, he's finding his way. Had a pretty serious injury. So far, he's got a 54.7 grade. So it's not like, I mean, he's also blocking for JJ McCarthy, or has been, which is no easy task for anybody. They got another guy on their list that I was super high on, Donovan Jackson in the draft, right? Like I would have been, I don't know if equally happy with Jackson or Zabel, but I would have been pretty as close to equal as possible. And Jackson had a really good first game. Actually had a 74 grade, 88.1 pass block. Second game, not so good. 44.4, 38.8 pass block. So that hasn't been as great, but I think he's played reasonably.
I think they're pretty happy with him down up there.
I think so too. I'm looking at how many pressures he's surrendered overall. He has allowed 4 pressures and a sack, which is not a small amount. Will Fries has allowed 5 pressures and a sack. So that's that group. And then you mentioned Chicago, right? Chicago went with the vets primarily. They brought in Joe Thuney, Drew Dahlman, and Jonah Jackson, right?
Drew Dahlman. I forgot about him.
Right?
Yeah.
So Drew Dahlman has so far a 59.5 grade. Joe Thuney has a 59.8 grade. Like he has never had below like a 75. Last year he was an 80. So it's not a good start for him. And then they brought in Jonah Jackson as well. Remember?
Yeah. Right.
47.4 grade.
Ooh. So Yeah, you have to wonder how much of it.
Imagine how you feel if the Seahawks had made moves to bring in more expensive veterans and you were getting that level of performance.
That would be tough to swallow. That would be, and again, why these guys come available. When offensive linemen become available, it's usually a bit of a question mark. Offensive line are so valuable in the league. You saw what even the Niners paid Colton McKivitz, who's been below average right tackle. There's usually a question, either an age question, an injury question. There's not a lot of quality. Like when Joe Thuney hit free agency the first time, that was New England screwing up. They should have signed him. But now you do wonder, are some of these guys damaged goods? And do we get excited about some of these guys that aren't that good? Which is why a lot of coaches and a lot of general managers would try to go through the draft, because quality offensive line don't tend to hit free agency. And again, I wonder how much is Chicago and just how things are going on there and how it's being coached. You look at Indianapolis, for example. They've dropped in Tanner Bortolini and whoever's playing right, Matt Gonzalez at right guard, and they're not missing a beat. They're one of the best offensive lines in the league. And you take Fries and Kelly out of there, and sometimes these systems can hide guys. And you look at some of the guys, like even in New Orleans, I was looking at some of the numbers with and without John Benton, and some of the guys have taken pretty significant drop-offs. And so coaching, and this is what John Schneider talked about, and we all kind of laughed at him, the coaching and the systems, they really matter. And it's very easy to get excited about these veteran guys. And still, I would have been very into, but I spent so much energy on Drew Dahlman and the mental energy on how he could unlock everything. And before he even brought his name up, I forgot about him. And things have not gone well in Chicago. They have a pretty high-paid, high-level coaching staff that things have not come together quickly for them.
Yeah, and I mean, you kind of think about it, Jeff, and maybe, I think it would have made us feel better to have a veteran where you feel like, okay, the floor is not going to be so low.
Yeah.
But the Seahawks, everything I know in talking with people in that organization is John Benton did not want the old guys. He wanted like someone younger. Now they looked at Will Fries, and they were going to sign that guy. I'm not sure I'd feel better about Will Fries and his price tag and his injury history and his performance level over what the Seahawks have now. Like, I don't know that I'd feel better about it.
And that's where free agency gets so tough, because I think a lot of the teams came to the same evaluation that the market was pretty thin. This was the one guy worth betting on. And this guy who's had pretty much 5 good games in 4 years was worth investing this much money in. The bidding war between the Vikings, I think the Cardinals were involved. And for a guy like this, who's a 59 graded player, whatever the number was, it's kind of crazy in hindsight. And so, yeah, they have not outperformed Anthony Bradford at right guard, which is kind of crazy to say. If you would have told me that in March, I would have laughed. I would have laughed in your face. And I haven't noticed Anthony Bradford. I know sometimes he shows up in clips, but last year you noticed him because of the penalties. You noticed him because of the whiffs. I don't know if he has a penalty. I don't want to jinx it, but I don't know if he has a penalty yet this year. And he's been relatively fine. And I think there's some things he's done relatively well. So cost value in terms of coaching, they've actually come out okay in a situation I imagine they felt pretty bad about at the time.
You teed me up perfectly, Jeff. So it's funny. I'm going to share a number for you in a second because I have the information about penalties with Anthony Bradford and beyond. But just looking for right now, for whatever it is, through 2 weeks, Anthony Bradford is the 14th highest graded guard in the NFL. He is the highest graded Seahawks guard.
Yeah.
He is right there with Matt Gonzalez from the Colts. He's above Robert Hunt of Carolina, above Trey Smith of Kansas City.
Trey Smith? He's above Trey Smith?
He's above Trey Smith and Cody Mauch and Damian Lewis. So, I mean, this is not, again, PFF grades are not decisive.
Yeah.
But they've also, let's be honest, Anthony Bradford's PFF grade last year was 48.3, and the year before that was 51.7. And I don't think we would have had a bit of concern about those grades, right? Like, those are pretty accurate. He was not very good. So I don't think we can completely dismiss it when all of a sudden his grade goes up. But part of what goes into these grades, Jeff, is penalties. And I was curious looking at this today because the Seahawks have the fewest penalty yards of any team in the NFL so far through 2 weeks. I was like, I don't remember the offensive line really having a problem. Well, so far, they're one of only 2 offensive lines in the NFL that have 0 holding penalties and 0 false starts. 0. And not only that, Jeff, but if you look back to last year, the Seahawks were 4th in the NFL in false start penalties, not somewhere you want to be. And they were 5th in the NFL in offensive holding penalties. So you're going from one of the most penalized offensive lines that was leading to a lot of 1st and 15s, 1st and 20s, or 2nd and 15s and 2nd and 18s or whatever, to even why this offense is starting to get going, not being held back by their own mistakes. Now it's only 2 weeks, but I think that that's pretty important if they can sustain that kind of discipline.
Yeah, I was going to say the sample size is small, so it's been 2 weeks. We might look ridiculous in a month or 2 months for bringing this up ever, but I think it just goes along the lines with what Dennison and Kubiak and Benton. That's what they were kind of told we were. The Saints writers talked about how quickly they installed their offense, and how quickly they installed their coaching. And you've kind of talked about it, how so many of those offensive linemen had better performances. And I've heard Mike McDonald talk about their operation a lot and how clean their operation has been and how he's happy with that. They've had a lot of plays where they've lost the run blocking on early downs and they've been 2nd and 9s and things like that. We saw Charbonnet's production last week. It wasn't particularly good. But in terms of like the pure operation and how that can set you back, and I've definitely noticed how much cleaner they've been just in terms of how they're playing, how they're coached. Obviously, last year was probably one of the worst examples, and it just felt like the last 7-8 years of the Pete Carroll era was just a lot of that same. It wasn't just the underwhelming players. It was the amount of times they were taking silly penalties, how undisciplined they were, how they weren't working in conjunction together. It was not a fun watch, and you watched Houston the other night, or you watched the Raiders the other night, and you're like, oh my God, this looks so familiar. And I think you tweeted out during the Texans game, this is like PTSD for a Seahawks fan.
Oh.
We've seen all that stuff, the snap penalties, and I think it goes to the coaching staff, and then it goes to Mike, that the fact is they're that low in penalties across the board, because Pete didn't seem to care about that as long as the other areas, their high performance levels were good. He would live with this stuff. This is a much more buttoned up operation, and it's good to see early returns on that.
So I know Jeff echoes this a little bit. Johnny A says, why does anyone care about PFF? And I get it. I'm going to reiterate like why I bring this up, because I think it's a little bit selective when people decide it's no longer relevant. If I was to tell you the top graded PFF guards from last year were Chris Lindstrom, Quinn Miners, Kevin Zeitler, Quentin Nelson, Dominic Pooney, Joe Tooney, Landon Dickerson, Kevin Dotson, Elijah Vera Tucker, John Simpson, Damian Lewis, Tevin Jenkins, Trey Smith, Tyler Smith, Cody Mauk, Matt Bergeron. Does any of that sound like, oh, they completely don't know what they're doing? They're way off. Those are the best guards in football. So I get why people are like individual PFF grades are like, this is way off, or I don't get this, or this they've totally missed, or that there's some positions where they really are way off. I get it. But if you look at who ends up at the top and often at the bottom of those lists, it passed the sniff test. Like, and it is an objective, equally applied set of criteria. Whether it's a good set of criteria, that's totally debatable. But I think in absence of like, okay, let's watch every all 22 snap of every offensive lineman ourselves and come up with our own grades, I do think it's directionally relevant. Like that Anthony Bradford is grading better than he did last year. I think it's got to sustain, but I think it's relevant.
Yeah, I think there's certain positions where it's proven over time that they're pretty good at it. And I think Josh brought this up to me this week, that offensive line and defensive line historically have been really well graded by them. And you just read out the numbers. Linebacker and safety has been a weakness of theirs because of just how unique their responsibilities are and how do you grade those. Like for years, they just graded Earl Thomas, and it was perplexing when he was definitely the best safety in the league. And Ernest Jones, the way they've graded him, relative to like Tyrell Dodson a couple years ago, and that just
even this year he's still a PFF.
Yeah, it's just they don't seem to understand that position well, or their criteria is just off based on coverage linebackers and things like that. But I will say, offensive and defensive lines historically, I've looked. It is a much better, a much more proven. I think it's much easier to measure. Again, I mentioned I didn't agree with how low Zabel's been. I don't think Zabel's been like a 80 level player or anything like that, but he's had one pressure, I think, in the season so far, and he's had some good moments. So I think he's been a little bit better. I've seen Baldy really do Baldy, who was an offensive lineman himself, is really focused on him. But I think we can, as someone who is critical of them and does question a lot of what they do, I was certainly irked by how they graded the Seahawks defense last week when they dominated the game and only 4 guys were over 70. It made no sense to me. But I think Brian is right. I will say, as someone who does get irked by them, I think when you look at like the full sample size, things tend to even out, and the cream does seem to rise to the top with their grades. And again, when you do look at the end of the year, it's not like it's always Lane Johnson and Creed Humphrey and those guys at the top. And
it's not just them. Like, speaking of trying to get a fix on what's going on with the offensive line, if you look at our good pal Ben Baldwin, and he does his offensive line composite ratings through week 2, Seahawks there are 21st, which is pretty good.
Big jump.
But it's a composite, which means, Jeff, it's bringing a few things together. So PFF, it has, I don't know how this, 40 out of 100. SIS has it 80 out of 100. ESPN's pass block win rate, Jeff, has the Seahawks as the worst offensive line in football. That's pass protection. And so, like, I find it very frustrating. 33rd team has their own offensive line metrics. They've got the Seahawks around 24th. And this composite grades has the 49ers as the 3rd best offensive line in the league. And I thought the Seahawks dominated that offensive line for the most part. Most pressures Brock Purdy has ever been under. Most pressure Brock Purdy's ever been under. So I don't know. Like, you can't take any one metric or any one group and just say that they've figured it out. But we talked about Mekhi Becton. I talked about James Daniels, who's already hurt again.
Already injured, yeah.
I kind of look through this, Jeff, and the move that maybe the one that I probably feel the most FOMO about is Connor Colby.
I liked him.
I know you, Rob, and I all were like, this guy was a good zone blocking guard. Like, are we sure he's not worth a flyer in the late rounds? San Francisco takes him in the 7th round. He's played pretty well so far.
He did. He stepped in for Ben Bartch last week against the defensive line we're seeing tomorrow. So I'm curious to see whether that's a Colby thing, whether that's a Saints thing. You always got to account for the opponent. But yeah, well, when Rob first brought up Connor Colby to me, it was because of his zone blocking skills. And I think he was from one of the schools that ran a lot of zone blocking, and he really stood out. And the Seahawks took Bryce Cable-Dew around earlier. We'll see how that one plays out. And if San Francisco gets a good replacement for Aaron Banks in the 7th round, that's going to be very irritating, because that was the guy who fit our scheme. We're running the same offensive line scheme perfectly. And for me, it's Jared Wilson. Knowing that he can play center, right guard, and he can play guard. He's playing guard at a high level. And they had 3 chances to get him. I would have been comfortable taking him before they traded up for him and Worry. I don't know what Tate Radledge has done. I know Detroit did a little better last week than they did in the opening week. But he's a guy we had my eye on. Yeah, Mekhi Becton I really liked before they hired Clint Kubiak. Once they hired Clint Kubiak, I said Becton's done. Yeah. So when we thought they were going to hire maybe Hank Fraley or that kid who ended up from I don't even remember that guy from Minnesota, the whiz kid from Minnesota. I didn't know what kind of offensive line they were going to run. So once Becton went to a very powerful team and the Chargers, that one never really fit once they brought in the zone guys. And Tyler Booker apparently has done pretty well in Dallas.
He's given up 6 pressures through 2 games.
Yeah, I don't like the offensive line people really like him, but we never passed. It's not like we passed on him anyway, so he's kind of irrelevant to us. He would have never got to Seattle, and he didn't really fit the zone blocking system. So I think we'd all be pretty happy to take Zabel again.
Yeah, I don't have any regrets about the Zabel thing. He's given up 5 pressures for what it's worth. No sacks, but he did give up a few hits. And like, look, what I see with Gray Zabel is he is still acclimating. He's not at his best, and at the same time, I see all the attributes physically and just professionally that he's going to be a great player. I think we're not going to regret that pick, but he has had some really rough reps, man. Like if you look at the touchdown pass to Torrey Horton,
Yeah.
he gets blown up on that play, flat backed on that play. And I think that happened a few times.
And yeah, I think the thing that's been impressive with him is just basically he went through all of camp as a small school guy who's making a big jump up in competition and just seamlessly fit in. And you see so many rookies, and we've seen it with the Seahawks over the years, where their first round picks are just like a roller coaster. And with him, it's like he just went in, became the starter. You never heard his name. Everybody loved him. He's playing the games. He's had some rough moments coming from a small school, like Grant Barton did and Cody March did. Same kind of thing. And he's taken his lumps, but overall, he's fit in pretty well. You haven't noticed him like jump off the screen as someone who's struggling. And I actually thought there'd be moments where he would just whiff, and like maybe you have to look a little deeper, watch the All-22. But again, I think he's acclimated really, really well. And I think that's really encouraging for a lot of these rookie offensive linemen take off in the second half of the season. That's been the trend. Like you saw with Grant Barton last year, it was a real struggle at first. Second half of the year, he looked like one of the best centers in the league. And then I don't know if Zabel will look like one of the best guards in the league, but I think he projects really, really well.